Sunset Oaks was a gleaming suburban enclave, proud of its meticulously trimmed hedges, uniform mailboxes, and neatly paved sidewalks. The residents praised their homeowners association, HOA, for upholding standards that, they felt, preserved property values and a sense of order. From the outside, it seemed idyllic, cozy single-family homes, a shared community pool, and neighbors who mostly got along. Behind the scenes, however, strict compliance reigned. The HOA had rules for everything: how high fences could stand, which days trash bins could appear curbside, and the exact shade of paint acceptable on front doors. Residents who accidentally violated these guidelines received stern warnings or fines. Some found comfort in this structure. Others deemed it excessive but chose to abide to avoid conflict. Amid all these official enforcers, one figure overshadowed the rest: Brenda Albright, though just about everyone in Sunset Oaks privately called her Karen. A middle-aged woman with a penchant for crisp blazers and a perpetually raised eyebrow, Karen was not the HOA president. She held only a mid-level board seat. Yet she wielded influence by constantly citing obscure bylaws, pushing for stricter penalties, and confronting neighbors about trivialities. She was convinced she alone upheld the true spirit of Sunset Oaks. To her mind, the slightest deviation from uniform perfection merited stern action. Though neighbors rolled their eyes at Karen's overreach, most complied to avoid her scolding. They recognized that if Karen set her sights on you, the harassment could be relentless. Little did they suspect that soon she'd launch a fresh campaign, one that targeted some of the most vulnerable, the residents reliant on wheelchairs, demanding they pay extra for the building's accessibility ramps. It would be an act so brazen that even the typically docile HOA would recoil. At first, no one realized Karen had singled out the wheelchair users. But rumblings would soon begin, revealing her plan to levy new maintenance fees, supposedly covering ramp wear and tear. And as soon as the rest of Sunset Oaks learned about this scheme, they'd rally in a defiant stand that would upend Karen's vision of total control. Sunset Oaks' central amenity building, located near the community pool, boasted a small library nook, a multi-purpose room for gatherings, and a few administrative offices for the HOA. Leading into the building were standard steps, plus an accessibility ramp built years ago in compliance with local codes. Wheelchair users, senior residents, or anyone pushing a stroller found it indispensable. The ramp, constructed of sturdy concrete and edged with metal railings, rarely required more than routine cleaning or the occasional repainting of the rail. Among the handful of Sunset Oaks residents who used wheelchairs, Carl Rivers was the most visible. In his mid-50s, Carl had been paralyzed from the waist down following a car accident decades before. He moved to Sunset Oaks, lured by its peaceful environment. The ramp let him attend board meetings, community events, and social gatherings at the amenity building with minimal fuss. Similarly, Patty Gomez, a retired teacher in her 70s, used a wheelchair due to advanced arthritis. She met friends at the library nook once a week for a knitting circle, always accessing the building via the ramp. Both Carl and Patty were well-liked, known for their gentle dispositions and neighborly warmth. Yet to Karen, they were emblematic of a new problem: special accommodations allegedly draining HOA resources. While the ramp's costs were negligible, Karen disliked that people who chose to be disabled in an expensive community, her twisted logic, faced no extra financial burden for the ramp's upkeep. She believed they should pay more if they used it more. No official policy mandated additional fees for ramp use. Such an idea seemed outlandish. But Karen, rummaging through bylaw clauses, found a potential angle. She claimed that certain sections allowed extra occupant fees for disproportionate amenity usage. Hardly anyone used the ramp daily except the wheelchair group. So, in her mind, that singled them out for a new line item in the HOA budget, a so-called maintenance fee. She reasoned that once she pitched it to the board, they'd see logic in her argument. Of course, the rest of Sunset Oaks would soon see the scheme for what it was: blatant discrimination against residents with disabilities. But at the start, Karen's plan was a whispered rumor, only a couple board members aware of her intentions. Meanwhile, Carl and Patty remained oblivious, continuing to enjoy the ramp without suspecting they'd soon become targets of a fee-based crusade. One balmy evening, Karen invited the other 4 HOA board members to a casual budget workshop at her house. Ms. Green, the HOA president, arrived with a small folder of typical budget items: landscaping costs, pool maintenance, minor building repairs. The vice president, the treasurer, and one additional board member also attended. They expected a routine discussion. Karen, greeting them with forced politeness, steered the conversation from typical line items to a new notion: ramp maintenance fees for disabled residents. She produced typed notes, listing how certain individuals used the ramp at a disproportionately high rate, presumably wearing down the surface, scuffing the rail, requiring extra signage, etc. She proposed a monthly surcharge, maybe $20 or $30, for each wheelchair user. They're the only ones heavily depending on that ramp, she reasoned. Why should the rest of us subsidize their usage? Ms. Green blinked in disbelief. The treasurer asked, but historically, ramp upkeep is minimal. We spend maybe $100 a year on touch-ups. Karen waved a dismissive hand. That might change. The older the ramp gets, the more repairs it'll need. This is about fairness. Another board member pointed out that many residents occasionally use the ramp, including those with strollers or rolling suitcases. Should they pay too? Karen insisted wheelchair users were primary, habitual ramp users. Stunned silence fell. Ms. Green quietly responded, "This may raise legal or ethical concerns. We can't just single out disabled folks for extra fees. Seems discriminatory. Also, we never had issues with ramp costs." Karen pressed that the bylaws allowed extra occupant fees for unusual amenity usage, referencing some obscure clause about damage surcharges. The others exchanged wary looks, unconvinced. The meeting ended with Ms. Green promising to research the matter further. Karen smirked, confident that once she hammered the financial angle, the board would capitulate. Little did she suspect that the board's reaction, and the neighbors, would be far more hostile than she imagined. Her push for a ramp fee, if made public, threatened to blow up in her face. Following Karen's pitch, Ms. Green confided in a close friend who happened to share the rumors with Carl. The friend found the idea appalling and wanted to warn him that Karen might soon try to push a new ramp fee. Carl, hearing this, felt both disbelief and anger. Pay extra for using the only means to enter the building? It smacked of blatant discrimination. He told Patty, who was equally stunned. Word spread among neighbors, who found the concept outrageous. Some believed the board would never endorse such a measure. Others, familiar with Karen's dogged persuasion, worried she might manipulate the budget to frame the ramp as a special cost. A mild panic grew among the wheelchair users, who felt singled out. If the board allowed it, what next? Extra fees for using the community pool if you have a certain disability? Ms. Green, approached by upset neighbors, tried to calm them. She explained that Karen had only proposed an idea, with no formal motion yet. The board had not voted. But Ms. Green privately admitted that Karen's references to damage surcharges might complicate matters if enough board members were swayed by cost arguments. The HOA could be open to lawsuits if they singled out disabled residents. Yet some board members were known to follow Karen's line if it saved money. Carl and Patty decided to attend the next official HOA meeting en masse with other wheelchair users and supportive neighbors, prepared to speak out. Meanwhile, Karen continued emailing board members, detailing how annual ramp repairs might soon balloon, citing improbable figures. She insisted that fairness demanded a user fee. She offered no real evidence, just speculation. If the ramp stayed free, she claimed, other residents effectively subsidized a minority. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation at the upcoming meeting. If Karen pressed for a formal vote, the neighbors would push back. Tension simmered. The entire fiasco threatened to tear the polite veneer of Sunset Oaks, exposing deeper moral divides. The next HOA board meeting promised to be more crowded than usual. Word of Karen's ramp fee had circulated widely. On the evening of the session, the community center's modest conference room overflowed with residents. Some came out of curiosity, others in solidarity with wheelchair users like Carl and Patty. Ms. Green, sensing friction, asked for calm as the meeting began. After routine agenda items, landscaping contracts, pool hours, the board arrived at potential surplus allocation. Everyone knew this item concealed Karen's push for the ramp fee. Ms. Green invited Karen to present her additional cost analysis. Karen stood, presenting typed pages claiming ramp, wear and tear required an annual budget line. She proposed a $25 monthly ramp fee for any resident, primarily relying on wheelchair or similar assistive devices. She insisted it was not discrimination, but expense recovery. A collective hush, then muttered outrage. Carl raised his hand. This is obviously targeted at us who can't use the stairs. You're basically penalizing a disability. Karen retorted that the bylaw allowed surcharges for amenities used predominantly by a subset. Ms. Green intervened, noting the Americans with Disabilities Act implications, cautioning the board about potential liability. Karen dismissed that angle, claiming the HOA was private property, not a public facility. She insisted they had the right to levy special user fees for unusual usage. One board member wavered, saying, "We do need to watch budgets. If the ramp truly costs more," but Ms. Green countered that historically the ramp's upkeep was negligible. The rhetorical battle soared. Meanwhile, neighbors shook their heads, many calling the measure shameful. Patty took the microphone. "I've paid HOA dues faithfully for 15 years. Now you want more money just because I'm in a wheelchair? This is unthinkably cruel." A wave of applause supported her. Karen scowled, refusing to back down. Ms. Green ended the debate by tabling the matter for a formal vote next week. The rift was wide. If the board majority voted with Karen, disabled residents might indeed face new fees. Outraged neighbors murmured that they'd protest. Some threatened to withhold dues. The showdown loomed, tensions rising in Sunset Oaks' normally placid environment. In the aftermath of that explosive meeting, the entire community buzzed. Furious at Karen's plan, residents convened in formal gatherings on front porches, in living rooms, forging a united front. They recognized that if they let Karen's ramp fee pass, it set a grim precedent for punishing disabled neighbors. It also challenged the moral identity of Sunset Oaks. Was it truly a supportive community, or a place that valued only uniform compliance at any cost? Carl found solidarity from families he barely knew. A father of two approached him, saying, "We can't let them do this, man. My kids sometimes use that ramp with strollers. Should we pay extra too?" Another neighbor suggested picketing or threatening lawsuits. Others wanted to gather petitions demanding the board reject Karen's motion. Some floated an even more radical idea. If the board dared pass the ramp fee, they'd orchestrate a mass revolt, refusing to pay the standard dues until the policy was repealed. Ms. Green, taken aback by the fury, privately told Carl she'd do everything in her power to defeat Karen's proposal. But the board's 5-person composition included 2 members who often caved under cost-saving arguments. Ms. Green wasn't certain of their votes. She advised the concerned neighbors to show up in force at the next session, ensuring the board saw the depth of public opposition. Karen, sensing the pushback, doubled down, distributing a financial report that inflated possible ramp repair expenses. She pointed to hypothetical scenarios. A major ramp overhaul might cost thousands. The possibility of litigation from someone falling off the ramp. She hammered fear-based financial claims, hoping to sway the budget hawks on the board. Meanwhile, outraged neighbors compiled actual maintenance records, showing minimal ramp costs for decades. The battle lines were set. Sunset Oaks braced for a monumental confrontation that spanned moral, legal, and financial realms. Carl, though unsettled, found hope in the outpouring of support. The next board meeting, a week away, promised to be a turning point. Either Karen's scheme would succeed, or the community's moral core would prevail. As the decisive board meeting approached, the outraged neighbors organized a Stop the Ramp Fee coalition. They collected over 100 signatures on a petition stating that any attempt to levy special fees against disabled residents violated basic decency and likely the HOA's own non-discrimination policies. They planned to present this petition at the upcoming session. Additionally, some cunning folks hatched an even sharper plan. If the board, under Karen's sway, did pass the ramp fee, they'd push an immediate measure to reduce general HOA dues by that same amount, effectively offsetting the new charge. That way, the net cost for ramp users would remain zero. The idea was to show that if Karen insisted on petty discrimination, the rest of the community would subsidize the wheelchair users by lowering overall dues. The plan had comedic irony. If Karen aimed to generate extra revenue from a few disabled neighbors, the entire neighborhood would hamper that revenue by an equal or greater cut in general fees. Of course, convincing the board to reduce dues was no small feat, but the neighbors believed public sentiment was strongly on their side. They simply needed to unify the message: no new fees for ramp usage. If you pass them, we'll slash overall dues. Some worried about the budget ramifications, but several residents pointed out that the HOA was flush with surplus from prior years. If the budget took a small dent, so be it. Punishing the malicious proposal was paramount. Karen, oblivious to this cunning idea, lobbied her usual allies, claiming she had strong community support. But behind her back, even her usual supporters felt uneasy about punishing disabled neighbors. The stage was set for a dramatic standoff. At the upcoming meeting, the Stop the Ramp Fee Coalition intended to voice their demands and, if necessary, threaten the dues slash. The question remained whether the board, faced with such an ultimatum, would choose Karen's path or the community's. The day of the board vote arrived, the community center packed beyond capacity. Dozens crowded the aisles, many wearing small pins reading, "No Ramp Fee." The atmosphere crackled with tension. Karen sat among the 5 board members, wearing a smug expression. Ms. Green, as president, tried to keep order, calling the meeting to start. The official agenda item read, "Proposal, Additional Ramp Maintenance Fee." Karen introduced her arguments, rehashing the inflated repair cost estimates. She insisted this small monthly fee from wheelchair users would offset these potential expenses. She tried to frame it as purely financial, not personal. Then Ms. Green opened the floor for public comment. One by one, neighbors lambasted the proposal as discriminatory and morally wrong. Carl took the mic, voice trembling slightly, pointing out how being forced to pay extra for essential building access was an act of punishing him for being disabled. Patty tearfully recounted her decades of paying the same dues as everyone else, never expecting to be singled out. Next, Linda from the new coalition read the petition with over 100 signatures denouncing the ramp fee. The crowd erupted in supportive applause. Ms. Green hammered the gavel to restore quiet. Then, in a twist, another neighbor, Ted, announced the coalition's fallback plan. If you pass this ramp fee, we, the undersigned, demand the board simultaneously reduce everyone's HOA dues by that exact amount. We refuse to let you profit from discrimination. Gasps followed, plus cheers of approval. Karen went pale, realizing the neighbors had effectively threatened to nullify the revenue from her proposed fee. The board members looked startled. Ms. Green, lips pressed, recognized the group's unity. She called for the board to deliberate. Karen pressed her colleagues to back her motion, but the treasurer expressed concern about the strong backlash. Another board member pointed out potential ADA lawsuits. Ms. Green signaled a desire to kill the ramp fee outright, but they had to vote properly. After a tense recess, the board reconvened. Ms. Green solemnly announced the outcome. The motion to impose a ramp fee was denied by a 4-1 vote, with only Karen in favor. Cheers erupted. Then Ms. Green, seeing the overwhelming sentiment, declared that no further discussion of ramp fees would be entertained without thorough legal review. The room burst into applause. Karen sat rigid, her face flushed. The neighbors had triumphed. Though Karen's ramp fee was decisively struck down, the neighbors' ultimatum lingered. They'd threatened a dues slash if the fee passed. Now that it hadn't passed, was the slash moot? Ms. Green, aware of the coalition's stance, asked if they still demanded changes to the overall dues. Linda from the group rose, clarifying that their vow to slash dues was specifically if the board insisted on a ramp fee. Since the board had rejected it, the group was content. Or so it seemed. But a surprising voice, a longtime homeowner named Gerald, spoke up. In the midst of all this, we've discovered the HOA has a large surplus. Perhaps we can reduce general dues anyway, as a gesture of unity. We've been paying quite high fees, and we seldom see major improvements. A scattered applause indicated some resonance. The crafters and other neighbors realized this might be an opportunity to gently push for a moderate cut. If the board was flush enough to consider pointless fees, maybe the entire community could benefit from a slight reduction. The board debated. Karen objected vehemently, claiming a dues slash was unnecessary and risky. Ms. Green admitted the surplus was healthy, but typically used for emergency projects. Another board member said a small cut, Even $5 or $10 a month might boost goodwill after this fiasco. The notion gained traction among the audience, who vigorously applauded any mention of reduced fees. Ms. Green hesitated, uncertain if a sudden cut was wise, but recognized the political momentum. Ultimately, Ms. Green proposed forming a short-term committee to study a possible dues reduction of, say, $10 per month. The crowd cheered. Karen sat stone-faced, watching her scheme boomerang. Rather than new ramp fees, the community might soon see a general fee discount. The board concluded the meeting with promises to revisit the dues revision next month, hoping to finalize details. The seniors left in high spirits, joking that Karen's money grab might ironically save everyone money. Karen felt humiliated. Instead of winning new fees, she now risked seeing the entire HOA budget shrink. She lashed out on the community's private forum, accusing the board of caving to a mob, claiming fiscal irresponsibility. She singled out Carl, blaming him for orchestrating the push to slash dues. In reality, Carl was relieved the fee never passed. He wasn't behind the new push. But Karen needed a scapegoat. She posted lengthy rants about how ungrateful residents were undermining the financial stability of Sunset Oaks. She insisted that if the HOA cut dues, they might lack funds for repairs. But many neighbors replied that the existing surplus was quite large and ramp upkeep was minimal. They argued that the cost of living had soared, so any small monthly relief would be welcome. Karen's arguments fell flat. At the next informal budget meeting, Ms. Green assured the board that a $10 per month dues reduction would barely dent the surplus. They'd remain well above the recommended reserve. The majority found it acceptable, seeing it as a community-building gesture after the rancor over the ramp fee fiasco. Karen alone refused to support it, calling it irresponsible. The rest recognized her real motive was bitterness that her plan backfired. Meanwhile, neighbors praised Carl's equanimity. He never gloated, though he felt satisfaction that the fiasco ended well. He thanked Ms. Green for defending the disabled community. Ms. Green responded modestly, grateful the ramp fee died before it triggered lawsuits or deeper moral conflicts. Still, a final vote on the dues cut awaited the next monthly board session. If it passed, everyone's fees would drop, ironically courtesy of the rebellious solidarity that Karen's fiasco inspired. The crafters, the seniors, the younger families, practically everyone but Karen supported the measure. Another comedic twist in a saga of petty tyranny turned on its head. As the official dues revision vote approached, the board members weighed the pros and cons. Ms. Green, leaning in favor, saw it as a way to unify the community after Karen's divisive attempt. The treasurer confirmed they had enough reserves to handle minor unforeseen expenses. Only major catastrophes might require special assessments. But that was always possible, dues cut or not. Karen lobbied board members behind the scenes, painting doomsday scenarios. She argued a single large repair, like roofing the community clubhouse, could drain funds, leaving them short. She also insisted that once the HOA lowered dues, it might be politically impossible to raise them again if truly needed. But many found her arguments suspect, given her prior misrepresentations about ramp costs. Neighbors rallied behind Ms. Green, writing letters, emailing board members, and even distributing yard signs stating, "Vote yes, dues relief." The sentiment was that $10 per month might not drastically alter finances, but symbolized the board listening to the community. Meanwhile, Karen's repeated negativity further eroded her credibility. On the eve of the final vote, Ms. Green felt confident she had the majority of the board's 3 other votes, excluding Karen's. She prepared a short speech about how the ramp fee fiasco revealed an overestimation of expenses, proving they could safely ease the burden on all homeowners. This was more than a budget tweak, it was an act of healing. Karen, seeing no path to victory, stewed in resentment. She recognized the board was set to pass a measure that was the polar opposite of her plan. She consoled herself that maybe next year, she'd stand for board president and reverse the changes. But it was a faint hope. Meanwhile, the wave of public sentiment soared. Sunset Oaks braced for the final board meeting, anticipating a historic outcome. On a mild fall evening, residents packed the community hall once again. The mood was tense, but leaning toward optimism. Ms. Green opened the meeting, breezing through minor agenda items, then arrived at dues revision proposal. She summarized the plan: reduce general dues by $10 monthly, given ample reserves and the overshadowing public desire. Karen, face tight, insisted on presenting her opposition. She repeated warnings of budget shortfalls and criticized Ms. Green's approach as reactionary populism. Groans and eye rolls emerged from the audience. Ms. Green patiently reminded everyone that standard procedures had been followed. The treasurer confirmed feasible cost structures. The community widely supported it, and ramp usage concerns had proven minimal, negating any extra fees. Another board member seconded Ms. Green's stance, praising the measure as a positive, unifying step. Then came the formal vote. By standard protocol, each board member cast a voice vote. Ms. Green, aye. The treasurer, aye. Another member, aye. Karen, a defiant nay. The last member, who sometimes wavered, hesitated, then cast aye. 4-1, the motion passed. Applause erupted, the crowd cheering, some literally jumping from their seats. A sense of triumph washed over the hall, reminiscent of the moment the ramp fee was quashed. The crafters and the seniors in wheelchairs clapped the loudest, beaming. Carl, though not reliant on the fee cut, was touched that his neighbors had effectively turned Karen's discrimination attempt into a boon for everyone. Karen, stone-faced, left the dais abruptly. Ms. Green hammered the gavel, announcing that starting next month, all homeowners would see a $10 reduction in their HOA dues. She thanked the community for their input and civic engagement, ignoring Karen's dramatic exit. The meeting adjourned in a swirl of positivity. Sunset Oaks had, once again, chosen empathy and fairness over petty rules championed by one power-hungry individual. After the meeting, Karen sulked in her home for days, refusing to interact. Neighbors reported seeing her blinds drawn during daytime, her usual morning inspections absent. Some guessed she might be seething over the outcome. Her push for ramp fees had not only failed but triggered a new wave of empowerment among neighbors, culminating in a dues reduction. She'd effectively lost credibility as an enforcer of strict rules. In an unguarded moment, Karen posted a bitter rant on the community forum. She accused Ms. Green of dereliction of fiduciary duty, bashed the neighbors as ungrateful freeloaders, and singled out Carl by name, calling him the catalyst for this fiasco. The community responded with fury, defending Carl's integrity. The moderators quickly deleted her hateful post for targeting a disabled resident. Some residents demanded Karen apologize. Others wrote Ms. Green, urging official censure for Karen's behavior. Ms. Green privately confided to a friend that she was exploring ways to remove or at least neutralize Karen's influence in the next board election. At the same time, the board's official letter confirming the new $10 dues cut arrived in each homeowner's mailbox. The letter didn't mention Karen or the ramp fiasco. It framed the reduction as a reflection of a healthy budget and a board that listens to the community. This letter, ironically, might have read as a victory statement for the majority who opposed Karen's negativity. Some even joked that each time they saw an extra $10 in their pocket, they'd remember Karen's attempt to impose a discriminatory fee. Karen's meltdown grew, culminating in rumors that she had threatened to move out of Sunset Oaks. Her close friend told one neighbor, "Brenda feels betrayed by everyone." If she sold, some privately felt relief. But official listings for her property never appeared. Perhaps she still clung to the notion of reclaiming power in the next election cycle. Meanwhile, the rest of the community settled into a calmer existence, untroubled by special fees or oppressive demands. With Karen's influence waning, Carl found a new sense of peace navigating Sunset Oaks. He used the ramp without fear of future fees, nodding politely to passersby. Encouraged by Ms. Green, he considered volunteering on a new accessibility committee to ensure the HOA recognized the needs of all residents, parents with strollers, seniors with walkers, or folks in wheelchairs. This was partly an outgrowth of the fiasco, a silver lining that the board wanted more input from disabled residents. Carl accepted the invitation. Over the next few weeks, he collaborated with Ms. Green and others on small improvements: better signage for accessible parking, smoother transitions from sidewalk to ramp, even exploring whether the clubhouse restrooms could be upgraded. The newly minted committee found that while Sunset Oaks was quite neat, it hadn't always accounted for subtle accessibility issues. Carl's perspective was invaluable. Neighbors supported these changes, seeing them as natural enhancements. Karen, if she noticed, made no comment. She had lost the moral authority to hamper such progressive steps. In a way, the fiasco over ramp fees had opened up an overdue conversation about inclusivity. Ms. Green told Carl, "Sometimes adversity highlights where we can do better." Without Karen's misguided push, we might not have recognized these other needs. Thus, ironically, Karen's attempt to penalize wheelchair users spurred a wave of improvements that made the ramp even more central to Sunset Oaks' daily life. The same structure Karen once called an unnecessary cost burden was now a focal point for positive change and expanded access. One sunny afternoon, Ms. Green and the new Accessibility Committee organized a small accessibility fair at the clubhouse. They invited an occupational therapist to speak on universal design, a local wheelchair sports group for a mini demo, and provided an open Q&A about accommodations in the community. Carl and Patty led a short session on tips for navigating suburban spaces, sharing personal stories. Residents came out of curiosity and support. The crafters brought crocheted seat cushions for wheelchair users. Families tested out strollers on various ramp angles. Kids tried a short obstacle course, simulating life on wheels. The atmosphere was part celebration, part education. Ms. Green gave a short speech praising the community for embracing inclusive values, referencing how petty conflict had led to important dialogues. Karen was conspicuously absent. Some suspected she stayed away to avoid the knowledge that her sabotage had ironically birthed so much positive energy. Meanwhile, participants donated small amounts to the newly formed Accessibility Enhancement Fund, which covered future ramp improvements, step conversions, or sign expansions. The highlight was Carl's demonstration of how easily he could move around the building now that the board had cleared minor obstructions. He approached the microphone. "I'm grateful to live in a place that overcame negativity and recognized that accessibility benefits everyone. Thank you for not just shutting me out, but letting me, and others, thrive here." Applause thundered. In that moment, the overshadowing darkness of Karen's ramp fee scheme felt fully dispelled. The entire fair underscored that the ramp was no financial burden, but an essential, welcomed fixture. Thanks to the community's stand, it remained free to use, a beacon of how they'd come together in the face of injustice. Though the community moved on, Karen's bitterness simmered. She rarely engaged with neighbors, seldom posted on the forum. Some rumored she was biding her time, waiting for the next election cycle to challenge Ms. Green for the HOA presidency. Others believed she'd lost interest in forging alliances, too humiliated by repeated defeats. A few had even confronted her personally, demanding an apology for targeting wheelchair users. She refused to yield, claiming she was misunderstood. Despite her isolation, Karen remained an occupant of Sunset Oaks. People occasionally saw her strolling alone, arms crossed, scanning for infractions. If she found small issues, like a mailbox slightly misaligned, she'd send complaints to Ms. Green, who mostly ignored them or politely dismissed them for lacking substance. Freed from the ramp fiasco, the board felt empowered to override Karen's petty enforcement attempts. They recognized how destructive her approach had been. Carl occasionally crossed paths with Karen. She avoided eye contact, or if forced to speak, kept it brief. He harbored no ill will, though he still felt stung by her attempt to levy fees that singled him out. He took the moral high ground, greeting her politely if they were in the same area. She'd nod tersely, then vanish. The other wheelchair users followed suit, refusing to stoop to her rancor. Life carried on, quieter now, overshadowed no more by Karen's drama. The board's next big project was upgrading the pool lounge chairs, aided by the newly minted surplus that remained robust even after the $10 dues cut. Many in the community marveled at how easily the budget accommodated small improvements once freed from Karen's alarmist perspective. Freed from that negativity, the entire subdivision breathed easier. Several months later, Ms. Green received a letter from an attorney representing Karen. It threatened defamation claims if the HOA continued falsely attributing malicious acts to her or interfering with her attempts to properly manage finances. Ms. Green read it with exasperation. No one had defamed Karen. She had, by her own admission, proposed the ramp fee. The defamation claim seemed empty, possibly an attempt to intimidate the board into reversing the $10 dues cut. Ms. Green calmly consulted the HOA's legal counsel, who laughed off the threat. He advised sending a polite but firm response. No defamation occurred, no retraction needed. Your client proposed a policy that was voted down. No further discussion. The attorney's letter ended by warning that any lawsuit from Karen would fail. Freed from worry, Ms. Green filed the letter away. Karen, upon hearing the board's refusal, found no further recourse. She'd lost every battle. The ramp fee was quashed. The community wholeheartedly supported the disabled neighbors, and the HOA finances were stable enough to allow for a general dues reduction. The fiasco had ironically boosted Ms. Green's popularity, diminishing Karen's influence. Some neighbors teased that Karen's vow to fix the neighborhood had ended by fixing the budget in their favor. With the legal angle closed, Karen faced a final wave of disapproval. If she tried running for board president, she'd likely face a humiliating defeat. Meanwhile, the ramp users and supporters carried on, celebrating their small but meaningful victory over prejudice. As a new year dawned, Sunset Oaks thrived in an atmosphere of modest progress. The Crafters Pavilion, built for a separate fiasco, remained a lively center of social gatherings. The wheelchair ramp was well-maintained, championed by an active accessibility committee. Carl, as part of that committee, oversaw minor improvements like adding a second railing for those using walkers. The board's finances remained stable, with monthly dues now $10 cheaper. A small but symbolic testament to the neighbors' refusal to exploit disabled residents for extra fees. Karen became a non-entity in most daily affairs, her presence overshadowed by the wave of empathy and rational budgeting that triumphed. She'd occasionally lodge petty complaints, but Ms. Green's board, emboldened by the fiasco's resolution, seldom indulged them. Residents who once cowered at her critiques found she no longer had the power to enforce or intimidate. Her repeated attempts at controlling others had stripped her of moral authority. Some said she planned to move. Others said she was stuck. Carl, now confident in his place, roamed the neighborhood with ease, greeting neighbors from his wheelchair. He enjoyed the ramp's wide, unblocked path, never again fearing extra charges or sabotage. He even helped new families with disabled children, offering tips on navigating the community's amenities. The entire fiasco left him proud of the neighbors who rallied to protect him from discrimination. If Karen had sought to isolate or exploit him, she'd ironically unified the entire block. In the hush of a typical Sunset Oaks evening, gentle porch lights glowed, children played in yards, and seniors strolled. Peace reigned. The memory of Karen's attempt to levy ramp fees felt distant, overshadowed by the enduring sense of triumph and a new communal identity shaped by compassion, not petty tyranny. A few days before the annual HOA election, Ms. Green orchestrated a small community gratitude night at the clubhouse. It was not an official event, but a casual potluck thanking those who helped maintain neighborly spirit after controversies. Carl was invited to speak briefly about how the ramp fiasco concluded. So was Patty, who used the ramp regularly. The crafters presented crocheted thank you patches to Ms. Green and the board for standing firm against Karen's discriminatory scheme. Karen, hearing of the event, chose not to attend. Others filled the seats, some curious about next year's direction, some simply wanting to celebrate. Ms. Green gave a short address praising the unity that overcame negativity. She singled out Carl's quiet dignity, reminding them all that an HOA's job is to ensure a livable environment for everyone, not to punish differences. The final lines drew applause, a symbolic reaffirmation of the community's moral stance. Carl, taking the microphone, said he never expected such widespread empathy from neighbors he barely knew. He thanked them for reminding him that decency prevailed over fear-driven policies. He admitted the fiasco was stressful, but the outcome was a kinder, more aware neighborhood. Ms. Green ended the night by unveiling a small plaque near the ramp's entrance. Accessible to all, a shared commitment. The crowd cheered, some eyes tearing up. They recognized how far they'd come from that day Karen first proposed ramp fees. The event concluded in a warm, potluck vibe, casseroles, brownies, laughter. Sunset Oaks, once overshadowed by Karen's meddling, now reveled in the knowledge they had set a new standard for communal living. The only question left was the upcoming board election, but few doubted Ms. Green's easy re-election. Karen's path to leadership seemed blocked by her tarnished reputation. Election day arrived. Ms. Green won re-election by a wide margin, with Karen performing poorly, only a handful of votes from her staunchest supporters. The final tally spelled the end of Karen's significant influence on the board. She quietly handed in her seat, defeated and resentful. A sense of relief spread among residents, many believing the Karen era had ended. Carl continued serving on the Accessibility Committee, forging modest changes that broadened community inclusivity. Ramp usage soared with new parents, older folks, or anyone carrying heavy items. The dreaded notion of a special fee had become an absurd memory. People only recalled it when joking. Remember the time we nearly had a ramp tax? Now we have a ramp plaque. Meanwhile, general HOA dues remained $10 lower, a subtle monthly reminder of how neighbors' defiance overcame a petty attempt at revenue from disabled residents. The budget stayed healthy, contradicting Karen's dire predictions. Ms. Green occasionally teased the surplus as a testament that morality can be financially stable, too. The rest of Sunset Oaks carried on with typical suburban rhythms, each small act of daily life unburdened by Karen's overshadowing wrath. Karen lingered in the neighborhood, rarely interacting. Some rumored she'd put her house on the market. Others whispered she might remain out of spite. But the communal consensus was that her once-feared presence had dwindled into a footnote. The final outcome of her ramp fee fiasco was not profit, but a widespread condemnation, leading to an unexpected boon for everyone. And so, the story ended with Sunset Oaks reaffirming that decency and solidarity triumph over discrimination. Karen's malicious plan, designed to extract fees from wheelchair users, had ironically spurred a wave of empathy culminating in reduced dues and a more accessible environment. If the community learned anything, it was that attempts to exploit the vulnerable can unify the majority in a powerful stand for fairness. In that sense, Karen's fiasco left a surprising legacy. A kinder, more cohesive neighborhood that recognized every resident, able-bodied or disabled, deserved equal footing on the ramps and sidewalks of life.